Prior to ever making my first video, I had been back engineering international law and domestic law for about 7 years. I didn't do it because I wanted to create a system or find a system that I could teach on the internet. I did it because I was awoken to the fact that there was a distinction in law between a man and a woman and an artificial being, this entity that was created by law. And I was awoken to the fact that my position within Canada was that of an artificial being. That's how law was treating me. Something that wasn't recognized as a human being and something that only had certain rights and freedoms of a human being. Now, as again I said, it took me 7 years to back engineer all this. I've been sharing this now for about 3 years, and I'm of the opinion, after having talked to many individuals, that a little bit of knowledge in the wrong hands can be very dangerous for an individual. This journey is not a journey of quick and go, just, oh, I understand a little bit so I know what I need to do. It's ridiculous if you think that is the journey that you're on. We've lived many years in deception. The state party has held us in deception concerning our rights and freedoms, or what has been available for us to operate under. And just like if I was to go and take a mechanics course tonight, after 1 week of study, I wouldn't come home and try to take apart a vehicle that I've never done before and then re-put it back together and say, wow, look what I was able to do. There would be some, after having taken a little bit of education, that have the capacity and the ability to do such a thing. But on the majority level, not everyone would be able to do that. And it's the same thing with human rights or fundamental rights and freedoms. When you get exposed to it, it's not something that you can wake up tomorrow morning and start exercising to say change your life or designation before the state party. It takes a long time to understand what has transpired in law, how they have and have not fulfilled their obligations, and how you would have to present this before the courts in order for the courts to produce a remedy on your behalf. Now, when I first started my journey, a lot of what I heard on the internet was surrounding the security of the person. There was rumors on the internet, and there still is to this day, that we all have a whole bunch of money that is available for us, but the government has seized upon it, and that's why we don't have access to it. And it's millions and millions of dollars, and this would be enough to take care of your life and your family's life, but the government's holding it from you. And that's the type of thinking or thought that is going out there under the security of the person. So this video tonight is going to deal quite a bit extensively with that situation, security of the person, what I've come to see and understand through my own journey and through my own exercising of my rights. Now, I just want to start off with something that's called the Vital Statistics Act. This is an enactment that's been given force of law here in Canada that is applicable upon every woman or every father whose wife is about to give birth. So every woman who's about to give birth who has given birth, this enactment is applicable upon them. That's what the government tries to say. Now, it states that in this enactment that the parents must register, and they use the word must, produces an obligation, must register the birth of the child within a specific time frame. I think it's within 30 days. And the enactment itself says either a hospital worker, like a nurse, the doctor, or the parents can register the child, but the child must be registered. You can't get out of this obligation. You have to do it. And it says that if you don't perform your duty by registering your child within the 30-day time limit, then your parents can be fined $5,000 to $10,000 for every successive 5-day period that the registration is not performed. So basically, if you're talking about in a period of half a year, you could be owing the government $100,000 for not registering your child. Now, this is the obligation that is placed upon our parents when we are born. They don't know what's going on. They know the doctor comes and says, can you please fill this out? You got to register the birth of your child. Now, also within this enactment, what we see transpiring is that two different forms, two different documents are created. One is called the registration of live birth. Okay, so that word live should start ringing bells to you. Live birth. And the other one is a birth certificate. A birth certificate. Now, the registration of a live birth indicates upon it that the one who is being registered, you are a child. That's your designation in law. You're living, you're alive, but you're a child. that birth certificate, as you've seen in my other videos, this is where the creation of the artificial person takes place. So you get that birth certificate, and then off of that birth certificate you go and you get all other identification cards that you'll get. So you'll get your social insurance number, your Medicare card. All these other secondary pieces of information are built off of that birth certificate. And that birth certificate is identifying that artificial person-in-law. And the registration of live birth is identifying a living being, howbeit at the time it is only a child. And a child is incapable of taking care of its own affairs, especially its monetary affairs. The International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, Article 6. This states, parties to the present covenant recognize the right to work, which includes the right of everyone the opportunity to gain his living by work which he freely chooses or accepts, and will take appropriate steps to safeguard this right. The steps to be taken by a state party to the present covenant to achieve the full realization of this right, the right to work, shall include technical and vocational guidance and training programs. In the recent video that I just did and shared on YouTube, we saw that in the covenant, in Article 2.2, it states that we're not already provided for by existing measures, where these laws, these rights and freedoms are not already existing in the state party in Canada, then Canada was under obligation to construct a new Constitution Act or to produce other measures in order to fulfill the rights and freedoms that were enumerated in the International Covenant. We learned that the International Covenant is the guiding mechanism, the controlling force against Canada concerning laws. Whatever was expressed in the Covenant must be expressed in domestic law. Now, we saw that a citizen in the International Covenant, it was recognized that he had the right, or it had the right to vote. Now, to have a right is a choice. It doesn't produce an obligation. Come voting day, will the police come with guns and tanks and armored vehicles and say, bang, 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 open your door, you have to go and vote, you have a right to vote, you must use this right to vote now? No, of course not. It produces a choice. You can choose to use it, or you can choose not to use it. This is what a right produces. Now we come to the International Covenant on civil and on economic, social and cultural rights, Article 6, and we find the following statement. It says, everyone has a right to work. Now right away we understand and we catch the fact, whoa, hang on here. This is saying that I have a choice. This is a right to work. And I can use it, or I cannot use it. Now the next emotion that will come up will say, well, if I don't work, how do I get an adequate living? How do I provide for myself? That's not the question right now. The question is, what does the international law state concerning work? We are brought up, taught, or informed that work is indeed an obligation, right? And from young, we're stuck in school, and we're told, you have to go through this in order to be able to work when you're older, to be able to provide that living for yourself. So never in our situation is work presented to us as a right, but as an obligation. However, when we look into international law, it states that everyone, now remember that everyone, when you see that word, that indication, it only means the human being. So everyone, only the human being, has a right to work. He can choose to use it, or he can choose not to use it. But it's the human being that has the right to work. And this is very important. It didn't say the citizen has a right to work. It didn't say the person has a right to work. It strictly brought forth the designation of human being, the man or the woman, by stating everyone has a right to work. And again, this is a choice. We see in Article 6 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights that everyone, the human being, has the right to work. Now, it further states that which includes, and they use specifically the word includes. So what they are about to mention is the only reason for working. Okay? When they use the word includes, it closes off what's about to be defined. So which includes the opportunity to gain his living by work. So that's the reason why you work. To gain his living by work. So what the law is saying here is that you have the right to work, and if you freely choose or accept to work, then the reason for this work is to gain your living. It's not for entertainment, it's not for joy, it's not for happiness, it's to produce, it's to gain, it's to earn a living. All the resources that you need to survive. You need food, you need clothing, you need a shelter, you need transportation, you need medication, and whatever else you need to survive in this day and age. That's what you're doing. And the law says that it is a right you have to choose to work, but if you use this right and do work, then you are gaining your living by your work, and this is what you are freely choosing to do. So there are many people who work for 30 or 40 years in a low-paying job and struggle in poverty, and because they are using their right to work. Now there are people who use their right to work and make a lot better salary, but there's a different measures, if you will, on this scale. Nevertheless, the law states that when you use your right to work, if you decide, yes, I will work, then the reason for doing this is because you will gain your living. So the human being will now gain his or her living. Now it's interesting to note here, we're referring to the subject of everyone. And when they use the pronoun, they use his, which we can replace with her. Because everyone is the human being. But if you go back into the covenants and go check Article 1.2, and this is for you to go and do as a little bit of homework, you will see they're talking about contributing to the state party's development, taxation, and they say, and the subject they use is people. They say that people have the right to decide if they will contribute. Well, here in Canada, you are rendered an artificial person, and it's that subject, that servant of Her Majesty, that is taxed or is asked to pay a contribution. When we look into the law, it says all people, and then when they use a pronoun, they describe it as an it. Here we see an everyone, and the pronoun describing it is a his, because it is a human being, a man or a woman. But in Article 1.2 of the covenant, it says people, and then the personal pronoun is an it, because it is not a his or her, an artificial being. International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Article 1.2. All peoples may, for their own ends, freely dispose of their natural wealth and resources without prejudice to any obligations arising out of the international economic cooperation based upon the principle of mutual benefit and international law. In no case may a people be deprived of its, see that? Its own means of subsistence. So the player or the subject here is peoples. We learned through studying legal dictionaries and legal law that peoples is an artificial person created by law. It's a subject and citizen of the state or of a sovereign, and it's not recognized under law as a human being, as something that's alive. And when it refers to it, it states its. However, when we look at Article 11 of the International Covenant, or Article 6, sorry, we see that it says the states parties to the present covenant recognize the right to work, which includes the right of everyone, so that's the human being, to the opportunity to gain its living. No, it uses the proper pronoun, his living. They know what they're doing in the law. So again, you have a right to work, and if you choose to use this right to work, then the human being now is gaining his living. Okay? Now what happens if we as human beings decide not to exercise the right to work? Just like we cannot exercise the right to vote if we are standing in the capacity as a citizen, well, here we can exercise the right not to work. Then what transpires upon the state party? The International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Article 11. The states, parties to the present covenant, recognize the right of everyone, notice the player, everyone, to an adequate standard of living for himself and his family, including adequate food, clothing, and housing, and to the continued improvement of living conditions. We're going to go back very shortly concerning work and the rest of that article of law, but I just want to show you now the contradiction or the two opposite ends of the scale of this. So in Article 11 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Right, we find the following. Everyone has the right. So again, the player is now everyone. It's not citizen, it's not person. So the human being has the right to an adequate standard of living. Now they use the word including. So whatever they're listing is not the only thing that we're entitled to. Remember before the words includes with an S closes off the list? Here they use the word including. They leave the list open. Well, we have the right, the human being has a right to an adequate standard of living, including food, clothing, housing, and continued improvement of these conditions. Now, this right does not attach itself to the citizen. The citizen, if he doesn't work, he has the right to unemployment insurance or welfare, and that will not provide you the necessities of an adequate living. So, as a human being, there's two ways to have a living here. Everyone, the human being, can gain a living, remember, by exercising the right to work. And the law is saying that you freely choose to do this. That's what the law is saying. You freely choose to gain your living by work as a human being. But the law also states that the human being can have an adequate living, including food, clothing, housing, continued improvement of those conditions, plus more things. And that's a right you can exercise. So in this position here, the state party is under obligation to the individual human being, to make sure that individual human being has an adequate living. Because they're a signatory to the international covenants, and they've said, whatever right and freedoms are brought forth in the international covenants, we will bring forth these rights and freedoms in domestic law. And here we're seeing that we, as individual human beings, when we're in the capacity of human being, have the right to an adequate standard of living, which the state party owes to us. But, and if they can get us out of that designation and into the capacity of the artificial person through operating the right to work, then no longer is the obligation upon them to produce an adequate living for us. Because the law is saying that we freely chose and accept to work, and in doing so, we will produce our own living. And you don't, state party, have any obligation to produce a living for me. Now, this is not what's transpiring, in all honesty, here in Canada. We are not taught the fact that there are two different ways of living here in Canada. We are taught from very young that the only way, the only option we have is to gain a living through our work. Now, when we go back into the law that we just read in Article 6 and talked about everyone had the right to work, it states furthermore that the state party, Canada, will take the appropriate steps necessary to secure this right, to produce this right, to make sure this right is realized on its territory. And the steps that they would take would be vocational and technical training or studies, school. So they promised, they said, in order to protect the right to work and to protect the right of everyone, the human being, to gain his living by work, we will produce an educational system that prepares the individual in order to gain his own living. And that's what they did. They stuck us in a school system and said, we're getting you ready, you're going to get an education, and you're going to go out there and work, and you're going to go out there and earn a living and gain your own living, and we're teaching you all this to secure this right on your behalf. Well, that's great, but what about my other right that I had? What about the right that you never taught me of, which was that I did not have to exercise the right to work, and that I had an adequate living available for me to exercise? Now, this video would be very, very long if I went into the resources of Canada and where the monetary access is to our right to an adequate living. This I will come in another video. But they never taught us that. And when you further look into education, when you check the international covenants, you find the following. It states that education was to be geared first and foremost to the teaching and promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms. And then secondarily, it was to be focused upon the person and his capacity or his place within society. So they even knew that in education, it was supposed to be geared towards this side of us, not this side. Only after having chosen to exercise the right to work, to gain the living, then they're saying we freely accept to do. And then when they come to education, they say it's a free society. But none of this was free. This was all forced upon us, all through deception, all by hiding and keeping us in ignorance to what rights are available to us. Now let's get back to a moment to what they had our parents do. Remember, they forced our parents to register our birth. And one of the certificates were for the artificial person. And the other one was a registration of a live birth. So when that document, the registration of a live birth, was created, what was produced against Canada? What liability was produced against Canada through your parents filling out that form? Well, they know that in Article 11, that international law says they must provide an adequate living to every human being that's on their territory. And now here comes a new human being through the birth, and the live registration of birth is the record of that new human being. Well, there must be a monetary amount, a monetary backing to provide the adequate living for the human being, in case that human being ever decides not to use the right to work, but to use the right to have an adequate living, to pursue happiness, and to enjoy life. So there had to be the security, what everyone talks about, of the person.